Hi everybody, this is Bruce with Habowskistudio, and this morning I'm heading over to a location called China Lake, a few miles from the house. I've painted there before last summer, of course during the summer, but it's of course April and pretty darn chilly. It's 24 degrees. Seems like winter won't let go of us here in Maine, so I'm really getting the itch to do some, a lot of plein air painting, but the chill is in the air, so to speak. But I've got my little gloves on. Hopefully that'll help keep my fingers warm, and of course the jacket to go over what I'm wearing. But two plans are to see how the lake looks. If there's some partial ice on the lake, that'll be interesting to paint with the open water. The other option is right nearby is a little, I wouldn't call it a park, just a grassy area that has a really cool old tree, kind of gnarly and stuff, that I might paint. I've been getting an itch lately to paint the trees, the character of trees without the leaves on. It's not really sunny today, so it'll be interesting to see how the structural component would turn out if I painted the tree. But we'll see, and get back to you when I get there. Bye. Okay, here we are at the location, and it is pretty nice here. This is beautiful. Gonna get a little glare from the sun in the camera here in a moment. Sorry about that. But over here are some trees I want to investigate. Check those out. Okay, I've decided to paint that boathouse right over there. And this is all like thin ice out here. And the reflections are interesting because you have a lot of subtle breaking up because of different translucency in the ice. So we'll see if I can pull this off. There's not a whole lot of color. I'll have to push the color probably a bit. I'm not sure what I'll do to get into that, but I like that tree going up with the shadows cast on the roof of the building. And yeah, let's get started. I'll be working on a 8x10 panel. Okay, I got my umbrella set up and my Gorilla box. And check out this cool rig. It is a camera mount that I'm going to use with my Canon ELPH here. And I have never used this before. It was sent to me by one of my Patreon supporters, John Castile. Thank you, John. It is super cool. This will be the maiden voyage of it. And I think we'll get some good angles on the direction it films. We'll find out. And let's get started. Okay, one of the things I expect to have happen as I'm painting, this camera might wobble, and I think that might be a problem. But we're going to see. Obviously, I'm pressing against it with my hand. With a brush, it may be different. So I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. I'm going to be using Ultramarine Blue. I'm going to throw in some Raw Umber, Titanium White, and I'm going with burnt Sienna and Cadmium Yellow. I'll be using this gambling product right here. And also, I'm pretty happy with this. Recently, 3 months ago, I bought this Utrecht Titanium White. I really like the consistency of it. It's really, really nice. So I'll have to get some more of that. Okay, doing my usual block in with, this time I'm going to be using the Raw Umber. And just to get some bones, obviously I want a low water line here. Establish where I want the points to end for the building. Watching my angles, bringing them down, matching to what I'm looking at. Like, I don't want it crooked, obviously. And this one is actually tilting that way. So they're converging. I like how this tree dances. I'm going to make the boathouse a little bit longer to bypass a tangent. And watch how you have lining up verticals. That will help you get proportions, compare lines to everything.
Hi everybody, how's it going today? So like I was mentioning there about comparing different elements with the verticals, that sort of goes back to a video I made about proportions and things on structural objects and in general. When you're trying to fit everything onto your panel, you just want to compare your horizontals and verticals. You know, like say for that big opening in the boathouse, you know, where does the right hand vertical fall in relation to the peak of the building? And then you can place those little indicator marks, and that kind of takes care of the drawing by itself. You can do that quite easily with the larger elements in a piece that you feel might be giving you trouble. And then as you tackle the smaller elements within that big shape, it'll be a lot easier. I have found it super useful repeatedly, and so it's become kind of a second nature thing for me. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video too, I'm using this new camera arm thing that attaches to my tripod that I think will give a better angle. It's very adjustable for these painting videos, and I'm actually pretty surprised. I had mentioned in the beginning that it might be very wobbly because of you know, when I'm brushing against the panel, but I actually don't think it's too bad when I see it in this editing process here. So I'm pretty happy with it. It's a little bit of extra weight, you know, to carry around, but you know, most of the time I'm kind of right by the road and that sort of thing, so it should come in very handy. I mean, it's not super heavy, so a nice piece. Again, thanks John Castile, one of my Patreon uh, subscribers, sent it to me. Very kind of him. So here I am just knocking in some darks of the building to start defining some range of lights and darks. And this boathouse is very dark in general. Like you can sometimes in the videos see in the background, you can see the boathouse. It's all these very kind of dull colors, and I had to change a few things about it as I was painting it. And I might go in later on once the painting's dry and adjust a few more things in the building, like these retainer walls. I need a little adjustment, but it happens. And just kind of mixed up a green. It wasn't as cool as what was in the building in real life, but the value matched, so that's all I really cared about because I was using a limited palette. I've just been on this kick lately with these limited palettes. I really enjoy them, but pretty soon here I'll be going back to mixing it up with my standard palette of a warm and cool blue, yellow, and red, and a earth color. And this panel is very, I used a pretty absorbent gesso that really was causing problems and stuff in it. It was very hard to feel like I was setting the paint on there. So, got to live and learn on that. I'd like more of a smoother, not glassy surface to paint on, but definitely a smoother one than this was. So I experimented and it didn't work out. So now we're going to get back to some on-site commentary, and I'll catch up to you.
Okay, this is just a super roughed in sketch, about 20 minutes. I want to get some base color tones. One thing I worked on here was a very absorbent gessoed panel that in the end I don't really care for. It's really sucking up the paint, but I went ahead and went for it because this is the only 8x10 I have right now. And but I'm liking the relationship of tones, and once I start putting in some tree branches and that sort of thing, it's going to start leading the eye around and break up some of this sameness that we got going on. I've extended the trees up past over here, even though they're level in the background, to add some interest. Artistic license, so we'll continue on.
Now here here I am establishing some darker lines for some trunks in the tree, just to get a few marks in there for lyrical interest in the painting. And what I, again, back to the panel and stuff, what I normally do is I'll take my MDF boards. I tend to favor those quite a bit. It's a medium density fiber board. You can buy little handy panels at Home Depot, 2 by 4 feet, and I just cut them up on table saw. You can also buy it in big 4 by 8 sheets, but I have no way to get that home and all that good stuff. And then I cut them up to whatever size I'm going to use for paintings, and I gesso them with about 3 coats of gesso, sanding in between each coat with pretty fine sandpaper. And that seems to be a really nice effect. I was using, what was it before? I believe it was Frederick's gesso, and I had to buy some new stuff. I bought some Jerry's Artorama gesso, and haven't experimented with it enough, but it seems more absorbent. A lot of times, too, I'll go through a spell, which I recently did on some canvases, of applying the traditional oil ground, which is really nice to paint on, and I might go ahead and switch to that for my panels. Something else to consider real quick when I'm thinking about it, too, is about the building and proportions and stuff. There are times when you may want to, what would I call it, age something to add to the message that you're trying to tell in your painting. Like, what if you wanted to, say, make the building a little rougher? Maybe it's too clean and neat. So angle your lines a bit to show some more character to the building, if you like. Just be careful too much, especially if you're trying to work realistically. There are parameters in terms of perspective you have to pretty much pay attention to, otherwise it begins to look like a different kind of genre painting in terms of surreal or that sort of thing. Or you really want to be careful of turning the scene into a caricature, like a cartoon. I favor, when I go out to paint, to really stay pretty true to the scene, changing a few things for design purposes, but not ramping up the color excessively. I don't think of myself as a colors. I'm more of a value kind of guy, and so when I put those some stronger notes of color, they kind of really pop. Gives like a stage for the colors, the brighter colors, to shine on. And now I'm just kind of knocking in some subtle value differences in the background trees, some warm tones, some cooler tones, just to give a suggestion of different levels of trees back there. Boy, it was just, I so wanted some nice thick wet paint to really get some blending going on, but it just, was a problem, and just had to fight through it. But I got some information. I think that once the painting is dry, I'll be able to, in the studio, really try to figure out how I could combat this in the future if I ever run into it again, in terms of maybe adding more oil or oil and terps mixed with the paint to get it really flowing. I'll probably have better luck in the studio because, of course, it'll be a dry layer and kind of like sealed in a sense. We'll find out, because I am liking the building and tree with the cast shadow. That really interested me in the composition. And I think what I might do is chop off the right hand side of the painting on table saw, probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches, kind of make it more of a vertical, and just make the focus more right there on the boathouse. I'll study the painting more and figure out if that's what I want to do, and that'll be nice for the tree that I'll build more on in terms of interest for highlights and such later on. Now, doing my technique I like to do of cutting some parts in between the dark mats I put in there to suggest, as it reaches the sky, bits of tree limbs that are starting to show their individual character. And I'll go back and forth with that later on, just cutting around some of the tree branches I created before to clean some of those up. It's a nice effect sometimes when you go back in and cut around and pull out a shape, as opposed to having the two elements, the sky and the branch, just meet up. It's very hard to explain unless you practice doing it, but you get different feel to how it projects towards the viewer. And when I was cutting in the sky holes, like in tree branches, like I am now, as the paint might have mixed a little bit with that brownish tone, I still use that in the bulk of the mask to create some lighter shades of tree trunks. So I'm not going back to the palette excessively, which is possible good technique when you're painting outdoors for efficiency and speed. And I did change the roof was even kind of this ugly greenish color that I had to change. I couldn't have that value, so I lightened it up a bit and just made it kind of a blue-gray because I really wanted to show off that shadow of the tree. So that's the artistic license. Again, I don't make it real bright or anything. I pretty much, if I change something, I most of the time keep the same value. Very rarely will I step up the chroma. But in some cases, when you really want to draw your eye in, that's what you need to do. Just making some evergreen trees back there, kind of to set off against some of the drier looking winter trees. Now, just working on establishing, I try to get at least a minimum, of course, of 3 values in a mask to have some light, dark, mid values to give a suggestion of reality. And this area will need a lot of work later on, but as you'll see later on in the video of why I did not extend more effort into that part. Little hints of a field in the shadows, like the foreground field going into an area where the trees are casting a shadow on the ground. So that's a nice effect. I like that. And you can see how the darkening up some of the background trees, of course, with the roof line right against there. You got your light against dark, draws attention to the focal point there. And there's lots of opportunity right where I'm working right now. There's some weathered boards showing towards the water's edge near that little door I'm working on kind of in this area right now. That'll pull out with lighter tones later that really help kind of give it some character. And it had that weird retaining wall in the shadow in the bigger opening coming out. And I'm going to definitely adjust that a little differently. That retaining wall went all the way into the shadow. And it was just because the building is sort of independently adjusting and sinking a little bit in relation to these concrete retainer walls, it can look a little weird for perspective, even though there's a little age to the building, so it's not too bad in some cases. I think it's a little bit much. So sometimes I am more concerned with the color when I'm on site and getting accurate color tones, that it still can be difficult sometimes to keep track of every little element, like I was just explaining about those retaining walls. I tend sometimes to put in what I might see, and then when I get home and analyze it away from the subject, I'll see that make more rational decisions. I try to go more emotion with color and things like that on site. So I'll change a little bit in there. Now here I am putting in the shadow of that tree on the roof line, and I think it just adds quite a bit. Just that one line even, but of course I go back in and do other branches and such. It's going to be really fun when I revisit the painting and put in the highlights on the branches of that tree next to the building. I didn't have time to do that. There I am kind of painting some negative shapes around the birches to pull them out a little more without actually lightening the birches. A nice technique to try. Now this was really difficult, and in the end didn't spend a whole lot of time. I was so caught up in the building and the field and all that. This translucency to the ice, very difficult. You'd have to spend a lot of time seeing what's going on with the fissures, the cracks in the ice, the translucency. Right now, in the end, it just kind of looked like water in a way. because it was very close to breaking loose. The ice was very thin, but it's okay. I can either just make it water and don't worry about it, and that might help simplify to have some resting space for the eye in the foreground. I'll decide that as I study the painting more when it sits around the studio, like they sometimes do for a month. As I keep walking by it, seeing something new that I want to adjust, and eventually I'll know what to do. But the first thing, of course, is I think chopping off the right-hand side is really going to help. So just trying to get little bits of color back and forth in there. It's just that the sheen on the ice was really interesting that day, the angle of light. Very complicated. Here I am putting on some icing on the cake, I call it, with the rim lighting on that concrete barrier wall. The lighter tones with the weathered wood to bring out some interest inside. So I might put some like vertical like stud supports or whatever in that dark shadow, just suggest it. I think that'll be some nice to let the eye see a little bit more into the shadow. So as I'm playing back and editing this, I'm really kind of getting excited about trying to save it, so to speak. It's really kind of being removed from a couple days gives you a fresh perspective. I did like in the end, towards the end here, where I was getting some chunkier paint in the field to give some grit to the dry grass and that sort of thing. Okay, we're coming up on some more commentary and ending the video here, but let me know in your comments what you think of the piece and all that good stuff. And again, you know, not everything can be great, so we got to be vigilant about trying to improve and learn from each plein air adventure. All right, take care. Bye.
Okay, I'm going to quit this one. It's just not working out. I do like some parts of it, and we'll go over that, but overall, the absorbency of the panel from the way I applied the gesso, it was an experiment, and I did not like it at all. I was fighting it the whole time, even using some medium to try to help the paint flow. And but we'll zoom in and take a look at the painting. There's some parts I like, but hey, they can't all be successful, and you know, we just have to live and learn. And let's take a look. Here's the scene and the painting, and it is just so like it was just felt so scratchy putting the paint on. Even when I tried to apply thicker layers, the absorbency of the paint of the panel, the gesso, was just really crazy. But I kind of like the composition somewhat. The tree in the middle does not work, of course, but you know, what are you going to do? Had fun out here kind of playing around and checking it out. But there's a few strokes I like in there in the field. I like the tone that I achieved in the field. And birch trees over there on the left. You know, what are you going to do? It was also, you know, getting pretty chilly and stuff. My fingers were getting cold and everything, and I don't know, just lost my steam on this one, and might try another one before I go to work today. We'll find out. Well, that didn't go well. Not happy with the painting, and we'll go over why when I get home. But you know, it was still a nice day out. The wind wasn't blowing like yesterday. It was really windy, and my hands still got cold even though I had gloves on, but I guess that happens as you get older, more sensitive to the cold. So I want to thank you for joining me for the adventure anyway. I'm posting it because, you know what, not every painting is going to be a keeper, and we need to accept that and move forward and go on to the next one. So if you're new to the channel, thank you for watching, and I invite you to subscribe. And I invite everyone else also to check me out on Facebook, Habowskistudio. And please take a look at my Patreon page and see the rewards I offer and the exclusive content for pledging support to my channel. And that's it. Talk to you later. Bye. All right, here's the painting. I just got home a few minutes ago, and it is just pretty much a hot mess. The absorbency of the panel was very overwhelming and distracting, and prevented me from really focusing and being present in the moment. I tried to do the best I could, and after a certain time I just tried to experiment with some mark making. I do like the tones in the different parts for the color tones that I achieve for time of day sort of thing, but you know, the coolness in the trees balanced with the warmth in the field, but the execution wise is a lot to be desired. And you know, it's just live and learn. We cannot always be successful. And having, of course, the tree in the center is awkward, and I thought I could offset it with the trees on the right, but just wasn't working. And I'll just have to pay more attention next time. But I posted it anyway just to show you that everything you do is not going to be successful when you plein air paint. You just hope you can learn from your mistakes and not beat up on yourself too much, and continue on with the challenge of painting plein air. So take care until next time. Bye.